just, there's the PSA, non-PSA divide, but as you can see here, even within the PSA, something like 60% of the land is single family detached. So we are, Suzanne, to your point that there's, we can change the narrative, there's not much else. I think we can impact the master plan process, the general plan process. And from where I sit, that's, I think, where we should be heading, because we're clearly creating a segregated community today by our land use policies. You just have to look at these maps and it's obvious.
With school, like location of schools, school rating information overlaid. And also, Vonda, I think you said if we have any historical data on land use and zoning. So I asked that as my first confirmation. Is that of interest? Do you feel like you have what you need in terms of research, or are either of those two things still helpful for informing your learning or potential recommendations? Jessica?
I also hear an underlined topic that needs to be, I guess, facts need to be brought to the table about the zoning policies in place and the ordinances that may cause obstacle. Because I jotted something down, and I don't know if it was this meeting or last meeting, but my notes are jumbled together. But did someone bring up the adequate public facilities ordinance? I'm not familiar at all, but I would imagine through the name of it, it would have some limiting on growth. But somebody mentioned that or said something. Was that you, Phil?
I think in the last meeting we mentioned Apfo. Yeah.
Got it. Would it be so to that end? The other question I have here, because originally when Jessica and Felix and Colette and I were talking about like the meeting agenda and how to break folks out, we did talk about like, should there be any analysis or bringing up of like any other existing policies or ordinances that are like, that haven't been talked about, that are also drivers of inequity and segregation. And so going back to the piece you raised, Jessica, can you restate, should we do a little bit more research on that, or should we solicit a volunteer, potentially bring information on specifically?
I guess I'm speaking for me. How can you truly give an informed recommendation if you're not familiar with everything that's in place, like the actual policies and the rules and ordinances? I just don't feel familiar enough, and I'm speaking personally for me.
That's good. Jonathan?
So I do think Apfo is one of those things we have to consider, because it has been used to drive the type of development that's happening in certain parts of the county, right? Because if I'm most familiar with it as it applies to schools, and basically if a school is over a certain amount of capacity, it can stop a project from happening. And obviously a project with more density is more likely to get stopped than a very large home with relatively few residents on a very large lot, because that doesn't have as much impact on public facilities like schools and other facilities. So I do think it's something we have to consider, because, and this is my opinion, something like something like Apfo can work if everything else is static.
Okay.
But it's not, right? They're redistricting schools all the time, and they're moving people around. Quite honestly, some schools are more full than others, not because the area around them is so crowded, but because they've been more desirable, and past boards of education have given in, to the demands of certain communities or not to others. But what that basically means is it can close off certain parts of the county to certain types of development. And maybe not always necessarily so, in my opinion, because there are other ways of utilizing our public resources, and sometimes we haven't made the tough decisions or the unpopular decisions to utilize them in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for bringing that.
What's the word you keep saying? Apfo?
It's Apfo. It stands for Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, APFO.
Public Facilities Ordinance. Okay. Jonathan, is that something that you would be able to bring information on about ABFO and some of its existing policies? Or is that something you need help from council staff to gather, just in terms of access to that kind of information?
I'm not a complete expert on APFO, and I know it best from the school debate, but I think I could quickly find the information about what school attendance areas are considered closed because of capacity issues.
Peter has his hand up.
Okay. You guys, thank you very much. Yes, Peter. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, so the county publishes the schools that are open and closed every year. And I believe they put out maps that show that, which areas are open and closed for schools. And it's primarily schools that have been stopping new development. It doesn't matter what type. If the school is closed, it's closed to all development, all residential development. And the vast majority of the county is closed. So that goes to the production of new housing. I tend to think our recommendations are about changing the zoning, and schools are part of that. So if we're working with a school group, school construction allowing additional density will be a real issue. So I do think we end up touching on that. And so I think just because you brought this up, it's a good, it's a topic we have to recognize.
Okay.
Yeah, and also with APFO schools, after a certain amount of time, a certain amount of years, the development goes ahead. In other words, it doesn't stop it for all time. There's a time limit, and I forget what it is, 3 or 4 years. And after that, they can go ahead and build it anyway. So it is an interesting topic that should be part of our discussion.